My entitled brother thought he could just claim our family Lakehouse, but I revealed I was the real owner. And his reaction was priceless. Growing up in our small town of Portsville, Greg could do no wrong in the eyes of my parents, Linda and Jim. It didn't matter what he did or didn't do, because Greg was the golden boy. It started early. When we were kids, Greg was always the loudest, flashiest, and most demanding person in the room. He had a knack for getting exactly what he wanted. I used to think it was just because he was older or more outgoing, but as I got older, I realized it was something else. Greg knew how to manipulate people, especially our parents. Take school, for example. Greg struggled in every subject, but instead of letting him face the consequences, my parents would jump in to save the day. Failing a math test? Private tutoring. Forgetting a big project? Mom would stay up all night helping him throw something together. Meanwhile, I was on my own. If I needed help, the response was always, "You're smart, Mike. You'll figure it out." And I did figure it out, because I had to. But it was hard not to notice the double standard. Greg's failures were met with sympathy and support, while my successes were brushed aside like they were expected. I remember one time in middle school when I got a perfect score on my science fair project. My dad's response? "Good job, Mike. Now help Greg with his homework." By the time we hit our teens, Greg's golden boy treatment went from annoying to outright infuriating. He got his first car at 16, a shiny second-hand Jeep that Dad spent months fixing up for him. I still remember how proud Dad was, showing off all the work he'd done under the hood. Greg, of course, barely said, "Thank you." He just took the keys and drove off to hang out with his friends. When I turned 16, I didn't get a car. Instead, I got Greg's old bike and a lecture about the value of hard work. "You'll appreciate it more if you save up for it yourself," Dad said. Sure, that's a fair lesson, but why didn't it apply to Greg? Greg also had this way of turning every situation to his advantage, no matter how ridiculous it was. One summer, our neighbor Mrs. Andrews paid me to mow her lawn while she was recovering from surgery. It was hard work, but I didn't mind because it gave me some extra cash. Greg found out and decided he wanted in, except he didn't actually want to mow the lawn. He just wanted half the money. "Come on, Mike," he said, leaning against the fence while I sweated through the 90-degree heat. "We're brothers. You should share." When I told him to get lost, he went to Mom and spun some sob story about how I wasn't being a team player. Next thing I knew, Mom was telling me I had to split the money with Greg because it's only fair. Greg didn't lift a finger, but he walked away with half my earnings. As we got older, Greg's entitlement didn't fade, it grew. While I was busy studying, working part-time jobs, and trying to build a future for myself, Greg floated through life with no real direction. He tried college for a semester but dropped out because, as he put it, "the professors just don't get me." After that, he bounced from one job to another, never sticking with anything for long. Meanwhile, my parents continued to make excuses for him. "He just needs time to figure things out," Mom would say, as if Greg wasn't already 25 and living rent-free in their basement. Dad wasn't any better. He'd defend Greg to anyone who dared criticize him, saying, "At least he's here." That's more than we can say for Mike. Apparently, my decision to leave Portsville for college and start a career in Chicago made me the bad guy. Never mind that I was financially independent and visiting regularly to help out when I could. Greg was the loyal son because he stayed in town. One of the most frustrating things about Greg was how little he appreciated what he had. My parents bent over backward to support him, but he acted like it was the bare minimum. One time, Mom spent hours making his favorite dinner, lasagna with homemade garlic bread, and Greg barely glanced at it before saying, "Couldn't you have made steak instead?" I sat there fuming, wondering how someone could be so ungrateful. But my parents just laughed it off. "That's just Greg," Mom said, as if that excused everything. For years, I tried to stay out of it. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, but the resentment kept building. Every time I visited home, I'd see Greg sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone, while my parents doted on him like he was a king. Meanwhile, I'd barely walk through the door before they handed me a to-do list. "Mike, can you fix the gutters? Mike, can you mow the lawn?" One Thanksgiving, it finally boiled over. Greg had spent the entire day lounging around while I helped Mom cook, cleaned up after dinner, and even ran to the store when Dad realized we were out of ice. As we were sitting down for dessert, Greg casually asked, "Hey Mike, can you take care of my car? It needs an oil change." I stared at him, stunned. "Why don't you do it yourself?" He shrugged. "I don't really know how." Before I could respond, Mom chimed in, "Mike, you're good with cars. It wouldn't hurt to help your brother out." That was it. I pushed my plate away, stood up, and said, "You know what? I'm done." Then I walked out. I realized I couldn't keep letting myself get dragged into Greg's messes. He was never going to change, and my parents were never going to stop enabling him. The only thing I could do was set boundaries and focus on my own life. But Greg's entitlement and my parents' favoritism would eventually reach a whole new level, and this time, I wasn't about to let it slide. You'd think I'd stop being surprised, but let me tell you, nothing could have prepared me for the day I found out about the will. It wasn't even my parents who told me. It came from a friend of the family, Mrs. Turner, who has a habit of oversharing. Honestly, I don't think she meant to stir the pot, but she sure did. We were catching up at a coffee shop during one of my rare trips back to Portsville. Somewhere between talking about her cats and her new garden, she casually mentioned, "Your parents are so sweet, wanting Greg to have the lake house. That cabin means so much to your family." I almost spit out my coffee. "What did you just say?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "The lake house," she repeated, like it was obvious. "They're leaving it to Greg. It's in their will, right?" At first, I thought she had to be mistaken. I mean, how could they do something like that? The lake house wasn't just Greg's or mine, it was supposed to be for the whole family. It's where we spent summers fishing, swimming, and roasting marshmallows by the fire. Growing up, it was the one place where I didn't feel like I was playing second fiddle to Greg. It felt neutral, I guess. Ours, but apparently, that wasn't the case anymore. I went home that day stewing, trying to make sense of it. Maybe Mrs. Turner had misunderstood. Maybe my parents hadn't actually decided anything yet. Still, something about it felt too real. My parents had always had a blind spot for Greg, so was it really that far-fetched? I decided to confront them the next day. I stopped by my parents' house. As soon as I walked in, I could tell they weren't expecting me. Mom was sitting on the couch knitting, while Dad was fiddling with some gadget at the kitchen table. They both looked up, surprised but not exactly thrilled. "Mike, what brings you here?" Mom asked, a little too brightly. I didn't bother with small talk. "Is it true you're leaving the lake house to Greg?" I asked, cutting straight to the point. The room went dead silent. My mom set down her knitting, avoiding eye contact, while my dad suddenly found the screws on his gadget very interesting. "Where did you hear that?" Mom finally asked. "It doesn't matter where I heard it." "Is it true?" That's when they launched into their usual script, the one they always used to defend Greg. "Well, you know Greg has always been here for us," Mom said, like that explained everything. "He's the one who helps out when we need something." I laughed out loud, I couldn't help it. "Greg helps out? Are you serious? The guy can't even hold a job, and you're giving him the lake house?" "Mike," Dad said in that tone he always used when he thought I was being unreasonable, "it's not about that. Greg has stayed close to home. He's been here for us. You've got your life in Chicago. You don't need the lake house, and Greg does." I shot back, "What, so he can throw parties and mooch off your hard work? That place was supposed to be for both of us. You've said that my whole life." That's when Mom hit me with the line that really drove it home. "You're doing fine, Mike. You don't need it." There it was. I didn't need it because I'd built a life for myself, worked hard, and didn't rely on them for handouts. They decided I didn't deserve the one thing that tied me to my childhood. It wasn't just about the lake house, it was about everything. It was the perfect symbol of how little they thought of me compared to Greg. "Wow," I said, shaking my head. "I always knew you favored Greg, but this is a whole new level." "Oh, don't be dramatic," Mom said, waving her hand like I was some teenager throwing a tantrum. "We're just trying to do what's fair." "Fair?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "How is it fair to give Greg everything while I get nothing?" "That's not true," Dad interjected. "We're not giving him everything. You'll get your share of the inheritance." "The inheritance? Great. So while Greg gets the house, I'm supposed to be grateful for whatever leftover cash they decide to toss my way." It wasn't about the money, it never was. It was about principle, about feeling like I actually mattered in this family. I left before the conversation could get any worse. On the drive back to my place, I couldn't stop replaying the whole thing in my head, the way they dismissed my feelings, how quickly they jumped to defend Greg. It was infuriating, but it also wasn't surprising. This was just who they were. Part of me wondered if I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew I wasn't. If the roles were reversed, if I were the one struggling and Greg were the successful, independent one, would they still have made the same choice? I doubted it. After a few days, I decided to vent about it to my friend Sean, who's known me since college. He wasn't surprised either. "They've always played favorites, man," he said when I told him the story. "But you've got to ask yourself, why do you even care? You don't need their stupid lake house. You're better off without it." He was right, of course. I didn't need it. But it was about what it represented. Years of being overlooked, of working twice as hard for half the recognition, Of being told that my successes didn't count because I was fine. It's not about needing it, I told him. It's about what's fair. And this isn't fair. For a while, I tried to just move on. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But every time I thought about the lake house, about Greg sitting there on the porch acting like he earned it, I couldn't let it go. My parents had spent years enabling him, making excuses for him, and now they were rewarding him for it. I wasn't just angry at Greg, I was angry at them too. They'd always treated me like the backup plan, the reliable one who didn't need their support, and now, when it came time to make a decision that actually mattered, they'd chosen Greg again. After months of silence, my parents finally decided to reach out. I'd gone no contact after the Lakehouse fiasco because, honestly, I'd had enough. I was tired of being the overlooked son, the one they only called when they needed something fixed or a favor done. So when I started getting those emails and voicemails, I knew something was up. They didn't reach out to me unless they needed something. The first message came from Mom, a short, overly casual email with no specifics. "Hi Mike, hope you're doing well. Things have been a little hard lately, and we miss hearing from you. Let's catch up soon." It was vague enough to make me suspicious, so I ignored it. Next came a voicemail from Dad. His tone was softer than usual, almost rehearsed. "Hey Mike, it's your dad. Just wanted to see how you've been. It's been a while since we talked, and we'd really like to see you. Family's important, you know. Give us a call when you can." Still, I let it go. I wasn't about to play into their guilt trips, especially not after everything that had gone down. I knew them well enough to know this wasn't about family. They weren't reaching out because they missed me, they were reaching out because something had gone wrong and they needed my help. Sure enough, the next email from Mom gave it away. This time, she dropped the pretense and got straight to the point. She talked about how my dad's investments hadn't been doing well and how they were struggling to keep up with their expenses. "It's been a tough year for us financially," she wrote, adding that Greg was trying his best but couldn't do much to help. I had to laugh at that. Greg's best had always been the bare minimum, and even that was a stretch. Now, when they were in trouble, they were realizing the hard way that their golden boy wasn't going to save the day. Mom's email didn't outright ask for money, but it might as well have. She hinted at how they'd always supported me and how family sticks together in tough times. The tone was so manipulative it made my stomach turn. I decided to call her and get straight to the bottom of things. When I got her on the phone, she acted surprised, like she hadn't been flooding my inbox and voicemail. "Oh Mike, it's so good to hear from you," she said, her voice all cheery. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. "What's going on, Mom?" I asked bluntly. Why all the sudden interest in reconnecting? She hesitated, but I could hear her scrambling to find the right words. "Well Mike, you know your dad's investments haven't been doing well," she started, "and well, things have been tight lately. We've been talking about making some changes." "Changes like what?" I asked, already knowing where this was headed. "Like downsizing," she admitted. "We're also thinking about selling the lake house and maybe get some help from you." I paused, letting her words sink in. The same lake house they'd promised Greg, the one they'd effectively told me I wasn't worthy of, and now suddenly it was on the chopping block because they were in financial trouble. It was almost too much to believe. "What does Greg think about that?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "Oh well, you know Greg," she said, trying to sound lighthearted. "He's not thrilled, but he understands." I seriously doubted that. Greg had been banking on that house being his someday. It wasn't hard to imagine him throwing a fit behind the scenes. But clearly, my parents weren't about to hold him accountable. That was nothing new. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You're struggling because of Dad's bad investments, Greg's still not helping, and now you're selling the house you told him he'd get in your will?" "Mike, it's not as simple as that," she replied, her voice tinged with defensiveness. "We're just trying to do what's best for everyone." "Best for everyone?" I repeated, barely able to keep the sarcasm out of my voice. "Right. And I assume everyone includes Greg." "That's not fair," she said quickly. "We've always tried to do what's best for the family." I almost laughed out loud. Their idea of what's best had always been skewed in Greg's favor, and this was no different. It didn't matter how much trouble he caused or how little he contributed, they'd always find a way to justify it. I let her ramble on for a while, throwing in phrases like family comes first and we're all in this together, but I didn't say much. I could tell she was fishing for me to offer help without outright asking for it, but I wasn't about to make it that easy. After a few minutes, I told her I needed to think about everything and hung up. Over the next few days, I kept replaying the conversation in my head. I wasn't surprised they were in financial trouble. Enabling Greg for years had to take a toll. But it still irritated me that they were turning to me for help. I wasn't their safety net, and I wasn't about to let them guilt me into fixing their mess. That said, I couldn't stop thinking about the lake house. For years, They treated it like Greg's birthright, something he deserved simply because he'd stuck around. Now, the thought of him losing it, almost felt like poetic justice. They'd spent years prioritizing Greg, and now they were paying the price. I talked it over with a couple of friends, hoping they'd give me some clarity. My friend Sean was blunt as always. Dude, they made their bed. Let them lie in it. You don't owe them anything. Another friend, Liz, was more sympathetic but agreed. It's not your responsibility to bail them out, Mike. If Greg's their golden boy, let him figure it out. They were right, of course. I didn't owe them anything. Still, something about the situation kept gnawing at me, not because I felt guilty, far from it, but because I hated the idea of Greg somehow worming his way out of this mess unscathed. I didn't have a solution yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever came next, it wasn't going to be on their terms. So after weeks of letting them stew, I decided to deal with my parents on my terms. I wasn't doing it out of some sense of obligation or guilt. No, those feelings were long gone. This was purely strategic. I wanted to see how bad things really were and figure out if there was an angle I could play. So I called my mom back. When she picked up, she sounded overly chipper, like she'd been waiting by the phone. Mike, oh, it's so good to hear from you. How have you been? I'm fine, Mom, I said, keeping it short. Listen, I've been thinking about what you said about the Lakehouse. Can we talk about that? She hesitated, but only for a moment. Of course, Mike. What's on your mind? What's the plan? I asked bluntly. You said you're thinking about selling it. How serious is that? She launched into a whole spiel about how hard things had been and how selling the house would ease some of the financial burden. Finally, I said, all right, I have an idea. There was a pause. Oh? She said cautiously. I'll buy the house, I said straight up. No loans, no delays. I'll pay cash. The silence on the other end was deafening. For a moment, I thought the call had dropped, but then I heard her awkward little laugh. Oh Mike, that's very generous, but we couldn't possibly. I'm not being generous, I cut in. It's a fair deal. You need the money, and I want the house. Simple as that. But Mike, she started. Greg doesn't own the house, I said firmly. You and Dad do. And if you're selling it, I'm buying it. If Greg has a problem with that, he can take it up with you. She stammered something about needing to talk to Dad, but I could tell she was caught off guard. This wasn't how she expected the conversation to go. I told her to think it over and let me know, then hung up before she could come up with more excuses. Later that day, Dad called me. He tried to sound authoritative but came off as defensive. Your mom mentioned your offer, he said. It's unexpected. Is it a problem? I asked. Because if you'd rather sell it to someone else, that's fine. Just say the word. No, he said quickly. It's not that. It's just complicated. Complicated how? I pressed. Well, Greg's always thought of the Lakehouse as his future home, he said, like that was supposed to mean something. We don't want to hurt his feelings. I almost laughed. His feelings? Dad, this is a financial decision. You're not doing him any favors by letting him think he's entitled to a house you can't afford to keep. There was a long pause. Finally, he sighed. You're right. It's not easy, Mike. Nothing about this is easy, I said. But you need the money, and I'm offering you a solution. If you've got a better idea, I'm all ears. A week later, they called me back to say they'd accept my offer. I could tell they weren't thrilled about it, but they were out of options. My mom tried to spin it as a win-win. It's good to keep the house in the family, she said, as if that had been their plan all along. I wasn't about to let her rewrite history, but I didn't argue. At this point, I just wanted to get the deal done. We agreed on a fair market price, and I told them I'd handle all the paperwork to make it as easy as possible. They still looked for ways to drag their feet, but within a month, the house was mine. Once the sale was final, I drove up to the Lakehouse to check it out. Walking through the place felt surreal. It had been years since I'd been there, but everything looked almost exactly the same. The worn-out sofa in the living room, the creaky dining table, the mismatched curtains. All of it brought back memories of summers spent swimming in the lake and roasting marshmallows by the fire pit. But those memories were bittersweet now. This house had been a symbol of family once, a neutral space where I felt like I mattered just as much as Greg. Over time, it had become something else, a trophy my parents had dangled in front of him, a reward for years of doing nothing. Now it was mine. The kitchen appliances were ancient, the floors needed some love, and the deck was practically falling apart. I wasn't planning to live there, but I wanted to make it nice again, something I could be proud of. Over the next few weeks, I worked with contractors to get the place fixed up. During that time, I heard nothing from Greg. Part of me wondered if my parents had told him about the sale or if they were still trying to find a way to spin it. Knowing them, they were probably trying to soften the blow, hoping he wouldn't throw one of his tantrums. Meanwhile, I stayed focused on the renovations. It felt good to pour my energy into something tangible, something that was mine. I wasn't just fixing up the house, I was reclaiming it. This was no longer the place where Greg got all the attention while I faded into the background. This was my space now, and I was determined to make it better than it had ever been. I kept the neighbors in the loop about the changes, and they were surprisingly supportive. A few of them even offered to help with little projects, which was a nice reminder that not everyone in Portsville saw me as the other son. They were genuinely excited to see the house getting the care it deserved. By the time the renovations were done, the place looked amazing. The kitchen had sleek new countertops, the floors were polished to perfection, and the deck was finally sturdy enough to hold more than a couple of lawn chairs. I felt a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in years, but even as I admired the finished product, I knew the real satisfaction would come later, when Greg found out what had happened. After years of watching him coast through life, it was finally time for him to face reality. It started with a phone call from one of the neighbors, Mrs. Collier, who lived down the road from the Lakehouse. She's known our family for years and has always been a bit of a gossip. So when her number popped up on my phone, I hesitated before answering. "Mike, hi," she started, a little too cheerily. "I just wanted to let you know I saw Greg over at the house earlier. Is everything all right?" I froze. "Greg was at the Lakehouse?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Yes, he was moving boxes in," she said matter-of-factly. "I thought you'd asked him to stay there for a while, but something about it seemed off." Off? That was an understatement. I thanked Mrs. Collier and hung up, my mind racing. Greg moving into the house, my house, without so much as a heads up wasn't just bold, it was straight up ridiculous. I jumped in my car and drove straight to the Lakehouse, fuming the entire way. When I arrived, sure enough, there was Greg's beat-up car in the driveway, alongside a stack of boxes sitting on the porch. I walked up and let myself in. And there he was, casually rearranging furniture like he was redecorating his palace. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked, my voice sharp enough to make him turn around. Greg didn't even look surprised to see me. If anything, he seemed annoyed. "Oh hey, Mike," he said, as if this was just a normal visit. "Figured you'd stop by eventually." "Eventually? Greg, this isn't your house. What are you doing here?" I demanded. He shrugged, as if the answer was obvious. "Mom and Dad are downsizing, and they have no place for me in the apartment they've just rented. So I thought I'd move in here, since it's eventually going to be my house." "Makes sense, right?" I stared at him, stunned. "Greg, are you serious right now? I bought this house. It's not Mom and Dad's anymore. It's mine." He blinked, like the words didn't quite register. "What do you mean, it's yours?" "I mean I bought it months ago. It's legally mine. So you need to leave. Now." Greg let out a laugh, but it sounded forced. "Yeah, okay Mike. Very funny. I'm not joking," I said, crossing my arms. "Check the deed if you don't believe me." The smug grin on his face faltered as the reality of the situation started to sink in. "You bought the house?" he asked, his voice dripping with disbelief. "Yes, Greg. I bought the house. And I didn't do it so you could move in uninvited." For a moment, he just stood there, looking like he didn't know what to say. Then, as if on cue, he flipped the switch from disbelief to anger. "This is bullshit, Mike," he snapped. "You knew I wanted this house. You've always been jealous of me, and now you're trying to screw me over." I couldn't help but laugh. "Jealous of you? Are you kidding me, Greg? You've been living off Mom and Dad your entire life while I've worked my ass off. Don't even try to play the victim here." That only made him angrier. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" he spat. "Just because you've got some fancy job in Chicago doesn't mean you can come in and take what's mine." "What's yours?" I shot back. "Greg, you've never lifted a finger for this house. You didn't help pay for it, you didn't maintain it, and you didn't even know how to claim it. So no, it's not yours. It's mine." Greg's face was bright red at this point, but before he could fire off another round of excuses, I cut him off. "You have until the end of the day to get your stuff out of here. If you don't, I'll call the cops." "You wouldn't," he said, his voice wavering slightly. "Try me," I said, pulling out my phone. "I've already got the paperwork to back me up." "Greg, you're trespassing." He stormed out of the house, muttering something under his breath, and slammed the door behind him. I stood there for a moment, letting the silence wash over me. Part of me expected him to come back with some grand scheme to justify his actions, but for now, he was gone. That evening, I went back to check on the house. Greg's car was gone, and most of his boxes had disappeared from the porch. Still, I didn't trust that he'd given up completely. This was Greg, after all. He wasn't the type to admit defeat, especially not to me. I installed a security system the next day, cameras, motion detectors, the works. It wasn't cheap, but it gave me peace of mind. If Greg tried to pull something again, I'd be ready. I called my parents to let them know what had happened. "Your son tried to move into my house without asking," I said, skipping the pleasantries. "Oh Mike, that's not fair," Mom said, immediately going on the defensive. "Greg's just going through a hard time." "Going through a hard time doesn't give him the right to trespass," I snapped. "I'm not putting up with this. If he tries it again, I'm calling the cops." End of story. "Mike, he's your brother," Dad chimed in. "Can't you just talk to him?" "No, Dad. I'm done talking. He needs to learn that actions have consequences." They didn't like my response, but I didn't care. Greg had been coddled his entire life, and I wasn't about to enable him any further. If he wanted to act like the world owed him something, he could do it somewhere else, preferably far away from me. The next few weeks were quiet, which I took as a sign that Greg had finally backed off. But deep down, I knew it wasn't over. Greg had always been stubborn, and this situation was no different. He wasn't going to let this go without a fight. But whatever he had planned next, I was ready. I got a call one evening from a neighbor near the Lakehouse, Mr. Carpenter. He's one of those old-timers who's been living in the area forever and knows everything about everyone. "Mike," he said, his voice a mix of concern and disbelief, "did you know someone's been sneaking around your property?" That immediately caught my attention. "What do you mean, sneaking around?" "Well," he started, "I've seen Greg there a few times this week. He was poking around the backyard, checking the doors. Looked like he was planning something." This wasn't the first time Greg had tried to cross a line, so I wasn't shocked, annoyed, sure, but not shocked. "Thanks for the heads up," I told Mr. Carpenter. "I'll take care of it." As soon as I hung up, I logged into the security system I'd installed. Sure enough, there he was. The footage showed Greg pacing around the backyard, looking frustrated and defeated. It didn't look like he'd tried to break in, but he was clearly scheming. Instead of confronting him right away, I decided to play it smart. I wanted him to know that I wasn't bluffing when I said the house was off limits. The next morning, I made a quick call to the local police station, explaining the situation. They assured me they'd do a few drive-bys in the area to keep an eye on things. It was a small move, but it gave me some peace of mind. A few days later, I got the notification I'd been waiting for. Greg was back, and this time, he wasn't alone. He'd brought a couple of his friends with him, and they were carrying boxes like they were about to move in. I couldn't believe it. Did he really think he could just show up with backup and claim the house? I didn't waste any time. I jumped in my car and drove straight to the Lakehouse. When I pulled into the driveway, Greg and his buddies were standing on the porch, looking like they'd been caught with their hands in the cookie jar. "What the hell are you doing, Greg?" I asked, stepping out of the car. He crossed his arms, trying to look confident. "We're moving in," he said, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. I couldn't help but laugh. "You're what? Moving in?" he repeated, his voice tinged with defiance. "Moving in. Mom and Dad always said this house was supposed to be mine. Why can't you just let it go?" "Greg," I said, shaking my head, "legally it's mine. You can't just show up with your buddies and decide to take it over." He scoffed. "Oh come on, you don't even need it. You're just doing this to spite me." "Let me make this very clear," I said, stepping closer. "If you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops. And trust me, I'm dead serious this time. And you won't like the charges that will follow. Do you understand me?" One of Greg's friends muttered something about not wanting to get involved, and the other started edging toward the car. "You wouldn't call the cops on your own brother," Greg said, his voice shaky but defiant. "Oh, I absolutely would," I said, pulling out my phone. "And if you think I'm bluffing, stick around and find out." That was the final straw for his friends, who practically sprinted to the car. Greg stood there for another few seconds, looking like he couldn't believe what was happening. Finally, he grabbed his box and stormed off, muttering something about how I'd always been selfish. I didn't even bother responding. Once they were gone, I took a deep breath and walked inside. The place was untouched, thankfully, but I was still fuming. Greg's audacity never failed to amaze me. He truly believed that just showing up and claiming the house would somehow make it his. The next day, I decided to send a message loud and clear. I contacted my lawyer and had him draft a formal cease and desist letter to Greg. It outlined everything in plain terms. The house was mine, he was not welcome without my explicit permission, and any further attempts to enter the property would result in legal action. I mailed it directly to him and made sure it was certified so I'd have proof he received it. A few days later, I got a text from my mom. It was classic Linda, vague, guilt-trippy, and full of excuses for Greg. "Mike, don't you think you're being a little harsh on your brother?" I didn't even bother replying. At this point, I'd stopped caring what my parents thought. They'd spent years enabling Greg's behavior, and now they were reaping what they'd sown. If they wanted to bail him out again, that was on them. But I wasn't going to be part of it. Since then, things have been quiet. Greg hasn't tried to come back, and my parents have stopped pestering me, at least for now. The lake house is finally mine, no strings attached. I've rented it out to a lovely couple who take great care of the place, and it's become a nice little source of passive income. I'm glad I stood my ground. I drew the line. I didn't let their guilt trips, excuses, or manipulation sway me. And in the end, I came out on top. Greg might still think the world owes him something, but he's finally learning the hard way that entitlement doesn't mean ownership. As for me, I'm just enjoying the peace and quiet, knowing that I didn't let him or anyone else take advantage of me this time.